Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you the top 10 books that I ended up reading in 2021. So I didn't plan on making like this top 10, but it's just like when I was going through my bullet journal and I was writing down the books that were definitely the highlights of 2021, it ended up being 10. So I was like, you know what, that ended up being like pretty perfect. So it worked out that way, just with how everything worked out. But yeah, these are the books that when I was looking back at my bullet journal with everything that I read over 2021, these ones were the ones that were definitely kind of the highlights of the year and all those other things. So yeah, they're in no specific order because I couldn't like rank them, but yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So starting out first, this is actually the first book that I read in 2021, and it is A Promised Land by Barack Obama. This is a very dense book. It is very long. It's over 700 pages, so it took me a while to get through, but I was reading this around the time me and my sister was reading it as well, so we were able to kind of converse about it. But it basically is kind of a memoir of his like growing up, his Senate race, and then the first 4 years or so of his presidency. I think it ends when during the assassination of Osama bin Laden, and it kind of goes off, like that's where it ends. And I think there's going to be a volume 2 that focuses on after that. But this one I found very insightful. One of the big takeaways I got from here is that I don't want to be president, and I can't anyways because I'm a Canadian citizen, but I would never want to be in this position. But it was really interesting, and I was still pretty young when he was first like elected president. So in 2008 I was in high school, but still I don't remember a lot of these events. But I think in the second volume I'll kind of remember those events a little bit more. But I really like this. His writing style is really good. His just interpretations of some of the political figures that are still kind of very relevant now were very much on the nose, and I remember laughing at one of them with Mitch McConnell and how he described him in here, which I thought was really funny. But yeah, overall I think this is a really solid memoir. I'm very much inspired by the Obamas, like Michelle Obama, Barack Obama. Love them both, so I think this is a really interesting take on his experience and just kind of learning more about what it actually kind of being president is like. Next up is a historical fiction that I was eagerly anticipating, and it's a little bit bittersweet because it is the last book in this like trilogy, and so it is Sunflower Sisters by Martha Hall Kelly. I was so excited for this book coming out. I've loved this kind of trilogy, and I'm a little bit sad that it has ended, but I'm curious to see what this author does next. But for those of you who don't know, this is a historical fiction like series that focuses on this family and their kind of involvement in different eras of American history. The first book follows Caroline during World War II. The second book, Lost Roses, follows Eliza, who's Caroline's mother, during World War I. And then this one follows one of their aunts during the Civil War. And so it's a very much fictionalized story based around these real people. And this one, obviously, like I said, takes place during the Civil War. And I haven't read many historical fiction novels that kind of take place during this time. So this one was like really new. And as always, there's usually 3 different storylines that we follow. We follow Georgie, who is kind of a family member that is kind of related to the other characters in the series, who wants to be a nurse. She wants to be very much involved in the Civil War, fighting for the North and all those other things. Then we follow a slave and the slave owner's perspective, and then you get kind of how these 3 narrations kind of intertwine. And I think it's just really well written. This author has a way of really sucking you in. Like, you'll just be reading and you look up and be like, oh my god, I've read 50 pages already. I think there is something really special about an author that just completely makes you lose sense of time and all the reading that you've done. Like, it doesn't feel like you've sat down and read for a while. This one was really interesting. It draws a lot of parallels now to a lot of the racism that has obviously been about for hundreds of years throughout American history, but I think within kind of the last few years or so, just kind of the conversations that have been had about racism in America, which I thought was really important. But yeah, if you're looking for a historical fiction series, I recommend checking this one out. You don't really necessarily need to read them in order, which is nice. You can focus on the like time period that you are most interested in. But yeah, I feel like this was a solid conclusion to this series. So this was one that me and my friend were really excited about. We've kind of read this series in a book club for several years now, so we were very much eagerly anticipating this new release, and it is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas, of course, with the ugly new covers. But I know like there's a lot of criticism around Sarah J. Maas, and I'm well aware of it, but this is literally my guilty pleasure read. It is like, I know it's like, I do enjoy the storyline and the characters, and I'm interested to see like what happens next, but I'm just like deeply invested in these characters, and yeah, it's my guilty pleasure read. And I liked how this one also kind of focused on kind of mental health and all those other things. So besides kind of the smut and the other stuff, like there was a very kind of like a big focus on mental health, and depression and all those things, which I think is very important. But nevertheless, I'm just like here for these books. Like I just devoured it. Like this book is massive. Like I think it's almost 800 pages, but like I finished it very, very quickly. I can just fly through these. I just love these characters. I love this world, and I'm very curious to see what happens next, like in this one. But we have to wait another year for the next one to come out. But yeah, like I said, I'm a sucker for these. So this is a book that I like felt anxiety throughout the whole novel, and so I just felt on edge, and I was just, it was not a good time reading it, but that's how you know it's very well written. And it is The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. I've been a huge Kristin Hannah fan for many, many years now. I started reading her when I was in high school, and so I've just been loving a lot of her new releases as well, and I'm happy that she's become kind of more popular, which is really good. So I'm very happy about that. But this is her newest installment that came out this year. So the premise of the story is that we follow Elsa, who's never been really loved by anyone in her family, and so the first boy that pays attention to her, she falls head over heels for. So when she ends up becoming pregnant, her family disowns her, and she ends up moving in with the father of her child and her family. But it kind of follows her story of bravery and courage and standing up for herself and her family. This kind of chronicles the Great Depression and kind of the part of the Depression that was known as the Dust Bowl, where kind of in the southern half of the United States, it wasn't raining. It was very hard for farmers, or you know, just people in general, to make a living. And so she kind of has to very much kind of step up and, you know, take care of her kids and family. And this one was just, like I said, I felt so much anxiety for this. This is definitely not like a feel-good book. Like I was just anxious throughout the entire thing, and it was just really hard to see everything these characters had to persevere for and endure. And yeah, I definitely cried a few times throughout this one, but I think it's really a book you really need to kind of read. I think, like, especially, I do kind of have disjointed American history, kind of traveling back and forth between, you know, Canada and the US, and so I don't remember learning about the kind of the Dust Bowl, but I think it's a very important part of American history, so I did end up learning a lot in this, and definitely I think this is a book that everyone needs to read. It's just a very interesting, intriguing novel, and yeah, like I said, I felt anxiety throughout the entire thing. So next up, I have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is my first V.E. Schwab book. I don't think I'm really much interested in any of her other works, but I was very intrigued by the premise of this one. So it follows Addie LaRue, who I want to say in like the 1700s ends up like running away from her wedding day, and she ends up making a deal with the devil where she basically asks not to be owned by anyone, and so he twists that basically into no one knowing who she is. So she will live forever, but no one will remember her. So she goes about 300 years of this until one day she walks into a bookshop in New York City and someone does remember her, and it goes off from there. I just thought the premise of this was so interesting. I will say my complaint in this one was that I didn't really like the romance in here, and then the other character that get introduced, he very much had is a woe is me mentality, and it was a little bit annoying, so I wasn't able to sympathize with him as much. But I think my favorite part was the game, like the game of cat and mouse that Addie and the devil were playing throughout the centuries, and just how Addie was finding a way to leave her mark on the world when no one will remember her, I think was really interesting. And just the ending and like the twists and turns I thought were really well done. So yeah, this book got a lot of hype around the beginning of the year, but I think it was definitely worth it. I like scratched that with my nail, sorry. Like I said, I really liked it. I thought it was a really interesting take, and I just love the premise of someone not being remembered by the world but finding a way you can leave your mark on it was very interesting. And I did like the writing style in here. Like I said, I've never read any other V.E. Schwab books, just her books have never really interested in me, but I'm happy I gave this one a try, and like I said, I really ended up enjoying it. So this is one that should come as no surprise. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know I'm just obsessed with this series, and especially during 2021, I read like maybe 10 plus books of the series to get caught up, and it is the Inspector Gamache series by Louise. I love this series so much, and I cannot express how much this series means to me, but yeah, I just love it so much. Like even the new book that came out this year, I really loved it. It was like a post-COVID, post-pandemic world, which I thought was really interesting, and it was like the first like novel that I read that kind of integrated the pandemic into it, which is interesting because I feel like a lot of TV shows have done that, but I've never read anything in kind of a novel form. But there's just something really special about this series. It feels like home. I love the sense of having, you know, a found family, and during the time when I wasn't able to go back home to visit my family in Canada, like this provided me with an escape, and I still had that feeling of like family, and I think there's something really special about it. So of course I had to mention one. I don't think I have a favorite book in this series, like they're all pretty spectacular, so yeah, I love them all. So this is a book that I ended up reading for a book club, and I feel a little bit bad because I definitely judged this book by its cover initially because I wasn't sure if I was gonna like it or not. And it is The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby DeRay. So this one, like I said, took me by surprise because I don't think, based on the title, it wouldn't have been a book that I would have picked up, you know, just on my own. But it follows a girl named Addie who is growing up in a rural Nigerian village, and when she is 15, her father sends her off to get married to this older man, and it ends up being obviously a very abusive environment, so she ends up running away and gets trafficked into kind of human trafficking to work for this very rich family as a maid. But Addie really wants to find her louding voice, and this is something that she believes that if girls have access to education, they'll be able to find their louding voice and stand up for themselves. And I think that is such an interesting concept, and so Addie makes it her goal to, you know, be able to go to school, which was just really heartbreaking. And this is a very heartbreaking and triumphant novel. Like, you just feel terrible reading this for everything that Addie has to, you know, endure, but just her perseverance and just her ability to, you know, come above this and just rise above her situation was very inspiring. And I think this is definitely a book that everyone needs to read. It has a lot of important themes in here of giving women access to education, you know, human trafficking, all those things that are still very prevalent today in Nigerian culture. So I think this one was really eye-opening. I learned a lot, and it was a very powerful read. So this is another one that took me by surprise. I know this one is very much kind of like a cult favorite here on BookTube, and it was just one that I've just never really like enjoyed. And I read the first book like a couple years ago when it came out, and I just didn't like it, but I was reading it in part of a kind of book club. So yeah, this one took me by surprise, and it is Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Like I said, I know this is a cult classic here on BookTube, and I read Six of Crows. I didn't really like it that much. I didn't like the writing style of you get, you know, 15 pages of character background and 5 pages of plot progression, so I felt like it was very stop-go. But this one, because you get introduced, you're already introduced to these characters and their backgrounds, you get to kind of focus more on the plot of this one. And this had so many twists and turns, and I was just completely shocked with how these heists kind of just, the stakes got higher and higher, and you can't help but root for these characters. And so now I know what all the hype is about, because like I said, I read Six of Crows and I was like, I don't get it. But yeah, like I said, this one I was pleasantly surprised with. I see what all the hype is about, and I'm just really excited to see. I think there is definitely going to be a next one in here I saw on Goodreads, so yeah, we'll just be getting more of these characters, which I'm excited to see. But like I said, I had to give the Six of Crows book a second chance, and then I still didn't enjoy it, but this one made up for all of like the kind of stop-go narration, because once this book starts, you hit the ground running, and I finished it really quickly. And this is a pretty big book too, so like I said, I understand what the hype is about with this now. Next up, I have The Orphan Collector by Ellen Marie Wiseman. This was the Tales and Teacup book club pick to kind of end out the year. And I feel like especially for the book club for 2021, we had a lot of misses to start out the year. So I'm happy that we ended up on a kind of better note this time around. But this one is something that I think everyone can kind of relate to now. So we follow this girl named Pia, who is from a German immigrant family who's living in Philadelphia in 1918, and this is when the Spanish flu pandemic kind of comes about. So her father is away fighting in the war, and her mother passes away from the Spanish flu, so she is left taking care of her infant twin brother. So when she goes out of the apartment to find food, the twins ends up getting stolen, and so Pia forever blames herself, and she spends the next few years trying to figure out what happened to her twin brothers. And I think this one, the author does not shy away from the dark reality of the pandemic, and it draws, like, this was written before you know, our pandemic that we are currently in, and it just is eerily similar to just kind of go through those things where it's like no one wants to leave their house, like no one knows really what's going on. And it reminded me of the initial kind of first weeks of the pandemic, where it was just like kind of that eerie silence that I felt like were if you would go anywhere, like I didn't go anywhere, but just that eerie silence of like no one going out, everyone staying in their homes, just that fear. And it was just like drew a lot of parallels to kind of our experience now, which this happened 100 years ago, and the author doesn't shy away from the harsh reality of that. And yeah, I think, and also kind of the villain in here is very xenophobic, and especially with the COVID pandemic, we got to see a lot of anti-Asian, hate and all these things. So it kind of shows how these themes throughout human history kind of are cyclic, and they kind of come full circle, which I thought was really interesting. And it's terrible to see how we don't learn from our past, which is a little bit unfortunate, but I felt like this was a really great book. There's kind of like some magical realism kind of thrown in here, which took me by surprise, but I think it made it very interesting. My one complaint though is that I feel like we get like 350 pages of build up for Pia finding out what happened to her brothers, and I felt like the conclusion was a little bit rushed. But other than that, I think this is a very solid historical fiction, and one that, like I said, given the current state of things, I feel like a lot of us can kind of relate to. And lastly, this was the last book that I read in 2021, and it is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. And this is a series that has been on my radar for a while. When I was a kid, like, I never read this series, and I know it is one that is really well loved, and I'm a little bit hesitant with reading kind of books that are geared towards a younger audience because I do tend to read more adult fiction. I do have a hard time kind of reading down, especially for like middle grade YA, but I feel like this is written in a very kind of uniform way. I don't feel like it's written for children. I feel like it's like an easier read, but it's not like I feel like I'm reading something for like kids. Like, it does have very dark themes in here, but I don't feel like I'm reading a children's book, and I just love it. Like I said, I just love this world. I think it's just an interesting concept, and I can see why this series is so beloved. And definitely, like, my goal is just to kind of marathon the next 2 books in this series as well, just because, like I said, I really loved it. I finished it relatively quickly. It's like a 400-page book, and I finished it in like 2 or 3 days. I just couldn't put it down. I was just invested in Lyra's story and just kind of figuring out the mysteries of this world and kind of the predicament that she's put into with her, and just, it was like an amazing journey. And yeah, like I said, I can see why this series is so beloved. And again, with Harry Potter, I was late to the bandwagon for Harry Potter, and now I'm late for the bandwagon on here for like his Dark Materials, but I finally hopped on, so all is good. But yeah, I'm happy that I had like a new fantasy series that I can kind of binge, that there's only 3 books out, so I can finish it relatively quickly. So yeah, like I said, overall I was happy I decided to pick this up when I did. That's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of your favorite books of the year were and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.